Hello, I'm Charlie Rossiter, and welcome to Poetry Spoken Here on YouTube. We're the longest running all poetry interview podcast in existence. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload. But you don't have to wait for YouTube uploads. You can also download the show from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts. Enjoy the show. I'm Charlie Rossiter, and this is Poetry Spoken Here. Our featured poet today is Gregorio Gomez. Gregorio is a major figure in the Chicago spoken word scene, where he has hosted the notorious and longest-running underground poetry venue every Monday night at a bar called Weeds, now in its 30th year. Gregorio, originally from Veracruz, Mexico, is a man of many talents. He has also been managing director of Latino Chicago Theater Company that helped advance the careers of many young Latino playwrights. He's also produced 2 feature films, as well as a documentary, Not Just Painting on the Walls, about the murals and muralists of Pilsen, Chicago's largest Mexican-American neighborhood. In the second portion of the podcast, I'll be talking with Dan Wilcox, Albany, New York poet-photographer, about his world's largest collection of photographs of unknown poets. So, Gregorio, welcome to Poetry Spoken Here.
Charlie, thank you very much for bringing me to your podcast. I am very pleased that you've decided to give me an opportunity to be part of your programming. Thank you.
And I want to start right off. You are the MC at Weeds. 30 years.
30 years.
And there's some unique things about Weeds. You don't have a featured performer. It's purely open mic. Mm-hmm. There's no admission. There's no. Don't even pass a hat for donations. No. This is not like other people. And then for Chicago, starting at 10 o'clock, that's a little late too. That's different. So I mean, is there like an overall philosophy of Weeds here?
Actually, I'm kind of following the format that was started by Bob Sinclair and Bob Righteous Rudnick and John Sinclair. I am sorry, and they started late. They were rambunctious gentlemen from Detroit, and when I started hanging out at Weeds, and soon after I took over the mic, I just followed the format. What I did different is that I made it into a regular thing. Before it was just sporadic. I turned into a regular thing. And when I started doing it, I went and talked to, I'm waiting for the MCs, and I go to Sergio, hey, where are the MCs? And he goes, he starts bitching about this, bitching about that. And then a couple of people were there, and I said, well, does anybody? And it just, Sergio says to me, you do it. And it just happened. It little by little, it just happened. And what I thought was important was not the MC, the feature, or anything like that, and not realizing how that really became an ideology, a philosophy, that it was the poets, not even the audience were important. Today, the audience is still not important. If they're there, thank you very much, but it's the ones who are at Weeds. If we have 5, 6 to 10, 15, 20 poets. It doesn't matter. Sometimes we have so many, and sometimes we have 6. It is they who are there that are important. And to me, that's what's important. And that created this underground, created this machine that oils itself. I don't do a lot of advertisement, even though today we have, we're part of Facebook and all of that, but for years, we never advertise. If somebody said to me, what do you do with your poetry? And I would say things like, well, I'm at Weeds. And where is Weeds? I said, well, if you don't know, I'm not going to tell you. And so that was my thing. Well,
I remember.
Yeah, you got to find out. And of course, that was a way to just introduce the thing. make that person asking the question more curious, and I go, then I would tell them 1555 North Dayton, WEED Chi-Town, which is my introduction.
I was in New York one time doing a reading, and I mentioned I was going to do probably the poem I have about weeds, and when I said weeds, this person in the front row went, and I looked at her like, and she said, I would never read a poem there. I heard about that place. What do you think she heard about it? I'm like, what do you think?
I think she must have heard a lot of things. I think one of the things that she must have heard of, I think two things she must have heard is, one is we introduce you as a virgin poet. And what do we do? Can I use words? Can I use, heavy words? One of the things that I say is, what do we do with a virgin poet is we fuck him up. And I don't mean that literally, I mean physically. We mean is that it's a baptism by fire. And I say, if you can read at Weeds, you can read anywhere, because
right.
If I scare you enough, then you're good. The second thing that she might have heard was that we heckle. We have poet hecklers. That we have hecklers. We've always had hecklers. Hey man, your poetry sucks, man, or that ain't poetry, and this and that. But that's also a reminiscence of John Sinclair and Bob Rudnick, in which the poets talk to each other, or the audience talk to the poets, and that challenged us. It challenged me as a writer. It challenged me as you suck as an MC, man. What is it? I don't know what an MC is, because I never done it. I just knew that I somehow I was planted, and so those could have been those things that she might have heard. And it was dark and dingy and very little light, and there was a lot of other crazy things that went on. From the bra singing in the ceiling to that half a dozen incense sticks that Sergio used to burn so he could kill the odor from the night before. That kind of stuff. Yeah. But I think that that she would have benefited from it.
I agree completely. Yeah, I think she just didn't know.
Yeah, she just.
But
it
was so funny when she gasped.
Yeah.
My God.
It's a great story, though. I'm glad you shared it with us.
Yeah. So I guess I'm cool because I read at Weeds and I was a virgin poet once.
Yeah.
Well, how about reading a poem?
Okay, I'll do a poem.
Whatever you like.
Well, since I do a lot of poetry that is kind of socially oriented and all of that, I'm going to read something that is not socially oriented, because we're going to get into that maybe in the next segment. This is for a good friend of mine who lives now in the Czech Republic. She's from there, so this is dedicated to her. It's titled Casting Shadows. I don't do well in the sun. He burns my eyes. He burns my skin. Although a life giver, his mighty rays are dangerous to me. I like to cocoon with the moon. She is soothing with her cobalt blue fragrance, embraced in her warmth, lullabied by her charm, embraced in her arms. I am a child in her womb, and yet the moon is a dark mystery. The moon rules in the shadows. The crickets and the bullfrog, the snake and the bat dance to her ebb and flow. A rhythm of love, a rhythm of bewilderment, a rhythm of enchantment, sparking the heat in my blood, letting it bubble like a cauldron on fire, putting me on the edge, and calm is a riving storm. Volcanoes at their peak, birds singing on the wire, like a puma casting shadows as the moon illuminates. The last kisses that you gave me, the last kisses that you left me, are the ones that ache the most. That's it. For a lovely lady that I was in love with terribly.
Some people think you're a tough guy, but you seem to be pretty much of a romantic, if you ask me, man.
Hey, even tough guys have a soft spot somewhere in their heart, you
There you
know.
go. Absolutely, absolutely. That's lovely. Yeah. The moon on it. The moon is romantic, I think. You know?
Absolutely.
Just that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just-
In many of my poems, I always use the moon and the color cobalt blue. That to me, they're my signature
Mm,
lines in a poem.
yeah.
When
Yeah.
it comes on, and if you hear it, I don't know why, but years ago I saw a painting. I don't even remember who it was. It was, I'm talking about 35 years ago. I was at a gallery, saw a painting, and it was all these dark shadows and this blue with this kind of hazy mist. And as I looked at the painting, the woman who painted it, says to me, "What you think?" And I go, "You know what? I really enjoy it, but what's that color?" Because there was a moon, kind of hazy moon, kind of hidden, behind this. She goes, "That's the moon, and cobalt blue is the color." I fell in love with that phrase. I fell in
It
love with that.
sounds. Yeah. Cobalt. It just
Cobalt
sounds
blue.
great.
Yeah, it's not indigo blue. It's not this. It has this both power and gentleness and romance at the same. To me, at the same time, cobalt blue.
Yeah.
Anyways, and it's
Yeah.
it like I said, I fell in love with that phrase.
Yeah. Speaking of signature, I never ask you this, but when you send an email
Uh-huh.
or put a little note on Facebook
Uh-huh.
and you sign it, "The Ghost Who Walks."
Yeah.
Can you tell me where that comes from? What that's about?
Okay. English is my second language. When I came to this country, I was thrown into the wilderness. One night, I'm at home sleeping, and by 6 a.m., I'm in a place called Laredo, Texas. Well, I don't pronounce Laredo, Texas. To me, it's Laredo, Texas. And I hear all this wada 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 wada. So, there's cultural shock, there's language shock, that there's just people shock. I've never seen so many white people. I have never seen black people like that I saw in Laredo, Texas. And so for about a year, it took me just all these new things
Just to get
absorb.
oriented. Get kind of grounded again.
Yeah, and I was 13
Wow.
years old, and nobody says, "By the way, we're going to a place called the United States and a place called Chicago." No, we just were uprooted and boom,
Wow.
and replanted, in the city. And so it was very scary, and I developed two things. I became mute, and then I began to stutter. Fear,
Mm-hmm.
not knowing the language, and trying to pronounce it, that I began to stutter, and I became very shy. And I learned really I learned the language via comic books. When I got here in 1963 and I was put in elementary school, I was put back a year because the language. The teacher just threw me in the back of the room and gave me a book, and that was it. I started reading. I read comic books in Mexico. So I picked up these comic books, and I didn't know what they were. I just started looking, and then little by little I started picking out, and I started talking to different people, and other people started teaching me. So as I got immersed in the society here in Chicago, I read Spider-Man, the Iron Man, Thor, all those things. But there was this little one called the Phantom. The Phantom is this hero in the dark Africa, that kind of thing, in the jungles, And he was a tall, handsome-looking man in a purple suit, with a black mask. But he was called a Phantom, who never died. But the local people call him the Ghost Who Walks. I felt like the ghost who walks in the city of Chi-Town in those days.
Yeah.
Nobody saw me. Nobody cared. Nobody gave a shit.
Oh.
You know, as an immigrant, as a non-English speaker, I'm in school and those kinds of things. But I was invisible.
Yeah.
And because I was invisible, but this guy was a hero. He did hero things, but nobody knew who he was because he was the Phantom. And the local people
That's
said,
very cool.
the ghost who walks. And I'm now the ghost who walks because I think I'm a
I
hero.
almost guessed, but I was thinking of the Spirit.
Ah.
There's another. I just couldn't remember. I
Yeah,
remember the
this.
Phantom
Yes,
and the Spirit.
Yes, I remember the Spirit.
And I was
absolutely.
wondering,
Yeah.
is it one of those guys or what? So
Yeah, and I was heavily influenced by his ideology and his philosophy of being he was a human being. He was not some superpower like Thor. He was not bit by the spider like Spider-Man, you know, that kind of thing, which were great fantasy reads. They also taught me things. But he was a man with an idea who was taught by his father, who was taught by his father. Who teaches us but our fathers, you know? And so I did not meet my father till I was 13 plus years, and not because he was an absent father. He was absent because he was here working his ass off, you know, putting a roof over our heads, you know, 2,000 miles away. Mm-hmm. So but when I got here, he presented me with his what he believed in life, you know, and he never sat down and gave me the talk or anything like that. He would say things to me like, "Oh, vete por la sombrita como matando pájaros." What the hell does that mean? You know, he goes, go by by the shadows like killing birds. Well, what the hell does that mean? It took me years to figure it out. Take it easy, you son of a gun. That's what he meant, you know, because go by the shadows, you hang out. He would say things like that, you know, where one eats, two can eat, you know. Well, because you split that, he was a poor man. He comes from the nation of the Huichol in Jalisco. His mama, my grandmother, and his ancestors are from the Huichol nation, and so they have a certain idea as to how to do things, and so I think he passed that on to me, not by sitting me down and giving me and telling me, son, let me tell you that life. Right. He just told me things, and let me figure it out later on. And I thank him for that.
That's great. Yeah.
Wow. But you know what? Like I said, I am a politically oriented, and I use language. I learned to use language both in English and in Spanish, because in English I say I want my adversary to know that I'm talking about him. I want my adversary to know that I'm talking about him. I don't want to. People use another language to attack their adversary. The adversary doesn't know what the hell you're talking about. But this one, I am throwing it to my people. I'm using a bilingual, but this is my thing to my community. It's titled Open Vein. We dip the pluma into the open vein of our fallen guerrillero and give birth to el movimiento insurrección. Our weapons es la poesía y canción, a tattoo on the skin of a proud brown man, or the soft silkiness of piel canela. It's the obrero on the fields who raises his eyes and grasps ideas with our minds. It's that steel worker who forges the strength of our bridge, transcending from L.A. Aztlán to Aguas Blancas, USA. It's the GI Forum and Cesar Chavez, the Rodolfo Acuñas, the Valenzuela brothers, and Tomás Rivera, Rubén Salazar, and López Reyes Tijerina, Dolores Huerta, the Chicano movement, and the Mechas. Are we not la raza de bronce? ¿O somos the Chicano myth? It is us, el soldado raso, who carry the fusil. We are on the march with La Reconquista as our banner, we bend to a knee and ask, bless me, Ultima. I reach out to you from the winds of change, cause yo soy Joaquín in the city of winds, y no se lo tragó la tierra. Thank you.
Whoa. I pretty much kept up. Who is that cluster of names in the middle? What are they?
Well, those are people who have been leaders
Okay.
in our movement. The GI Forum, as a matter of fact, is a forerunner to the African American civil rights movement. It started soon after World War II, when in Texas, a white community refused to let a Purple Heart soldier be buried because he was Mexican in an all-white cemetery, and out of that the GI Forum developed. And President Johnson was at that time a local politician who then helped out with these things, and everybody else, Rodolfo Acuña, a writer, a historian. Of course, Cesar Chavez, I don't need to explain.
Yeah.
If you need to know who he is, look him up, Google his name. Dolores Huerta was one of his right-hand women in the movement. Tomas Rivera, he was an author who was heavily influenced. These are people who are influenced to me, and I'm throwing it back to my brothers and sisters, saying, look, man, we're an open vein, we're bleeding. Somebody, come up and and lead.
Pick up the torch.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I'm giving them and myself as well, because I'm not alone. I mean, they're not alone. I'm part of this thing. I'm letting them know that this group of people who, and there are many more, of course,
Sure.
who were at the forefront at the battle, and Mecha, the Chicano movement, which I was involved with, which is the kind of a smaller comparison to the Black Panther movement. So we're the African movement, the black in the U.S. There's a Chicano movement, where we begin to become politicized. Mecha is the acronym of a student movement in high school and college that I was an organizer of here in the Midwest. There's a book called The Labyrinth of Solitude by look it up. Look up the author's name.
Yeah.
Where I think it was a Labyrinth of Soledad, Labyrinth of Solitude, where he calls the Mexican, we are mestizos, we are mixed. He calls us the bronze people, and so because of who we are. We don't claim, we're not like the United States where we claim Mexican American or Irish American. We are mestizos, we're mixed, and we don't say, well, I'm a Spanish, because my blood is, we'll conquer people. So
You mentioned Bless Me Ultima, which is an Anaya novel.
exactly.
But was that it, or was that a generic phrase that people
No,
use for
I
other
use
things?
that. No, I
referring
use,
to him?
Yeah,
Okay.
I
Just
use,
curious, yeah.
Because I use the word. I use la reconquista. La reconquista is a word that I've been using since about the middle 1970s, 74, 75, in the Chicano movement, whether active or asleep or that, the Mexican movement. We are in a movement to reconquer our lands, okay, which is the Southwest. We're talking about Texas, California, Colorado, all the Southwest. We call it La Reconquista, okay, but we're not going to go at war at it. We are reconquering by becoming the activist political movement that we have becoming, which is now Donald Trump is, it's telling us all this, and I'm so glad. Thank you, God, for Donald Trump, because the idiot doesn't realize how much is not only unifying the Mexican, but is utilizing the South American and the Central American, like the Argentina, like the San Salvador and Guatemaltecos, because those people are also migrating So we're becoming a unified. Bless Me Ultima. If you're familiar with the book, it's about this young boy who's going through this journey, and so I said I found to one knee to bless him. So, but I'm also saying this to Mother, La Virgen Maria, Mother Mary, the Virgin, our patron mother, because our banner is La Virgen Maria. So I kneel to bless me.
You're listening to Gregorio Gomez on Poetry Spoken Here.
I also use, of course, Yo Soy Joaquin, which is a very famous poem, in which it talks about a historical out of Colorado. If you don't know who the author is, look him up. Yo Soy Joaquin. I'm not here to educate you. Like
No.
Alfredo Matias used to say, I'm not here to educate you.
But if you listen, you might learn something.
Yeah, you might.
You might.
I'm giving you the titles of things, and then you look them up.
You don't happen to have a poem about Donald Trump, do you?
No.
Okay.
And I'm not going to write about that.
Well, good. Yeah. Better to not mention his name.
I use all those references. Here's another one. This is okay. I dedicate this one to Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah.
Whispers echo. Misty apparitions wait in shadows of stars. Water from water on a moonless night. The formless, shapeless human tide listens for a signal, a sound, an echoed voice, tires and gravel, a coyote howl. Dark silhouettes in headlights glare. They silently seep into the breathless vacuum as whispers echo and words tumble on asphalt. Pressed shoulder to shoulder, face to face, they bleed in steamy beads of sweat as they ride for liquid hours. As scavengers wait to feed on desperation, their eyes glow in the distant hills as they watch the weak and dying in their endless migrant waves. Miles and miles far from the border, far from the river, so far from home. The blinding sun is resurrection as survivors ooze into the day, and from the hills coyotes howl. It's about my brothers and sisters who cross the border,
Making the journey.
making the journey. So there's a kind of but not everything. I mean, I write social political poetry about just being in the United States. I like to write crazy off the wall poetry, because writing is not just about even though it's crazy and off the wall, there's still an inner structure of humanity to things. I don't have to say screw you blatantly to tell you to screw you. I mean, some people use that word synonymous with hello and how are you.
Right.
So anyway, so that's but that piece is for my brothers and sisters who cross the border on a daily basis and in a dangerous situation, even worse now because the political situation has given those vigilantes at the border kind of carte blanche to attack those people who are crossing over.
Well, you want to do one more?
Want to read it? Okay, what would you like me to read this time?
Whatever you like.
Whatever you. Okay, let's go to one of those off the wall poems.
Oh, that's good. You haven't done that yet. Okay,
Yeah,
good. Cool.
and an off the wall poem, it has. But if you really listen to it, it does have something in it. It's titled A Tasty Morsel. A tasty morsel. Strawberry, toe jam, and marshmallow cow pies are gathered by the Chango man for his lion bride that waits by the sulphur seaside for his return at the rise of the shallow moon. The thunderbolts of paraffin explode from the groin of midget volcanoes that cultivate blue horned toads in winter, a tasty morsel before fornication, as the lioness bitch purrs in self indulgence, wagging her tail to let her scent filter through the atmosphere. The devil god picks at his teeth with his trident and spits fire into the wind as he strokes his lyre made of gold and silk pubic strings of virgin, a melodious reverberation intoxicating the beasts, and Chango man breathes deeply the aromatic air. A roar spews from deep within his loins, sending notice of his arrival, as all creatures fart and jump and shrink and twist and shout, as a snake stands by the roadside, promoting the new and improved shiny red apples for longer lasting manliness, up to 4 hours. The native populace gathers around drums as the electric purple sky rotates, and nimbus clouds with their fierce velocity and no trepidation dance in a frenzy. The crescendo of this lunacy spreads as they eat hallucinogenic mangoes and smoke papaya seeds in their hookahs. On the distant hill of magnolias and marigolds, Chango man and his lioness bitch joust playfully, the shiny red apple firmly in his hands, as the muse and poetic inspiration began to flow. He spoke of his heroic adventures in the Amazons, and how he overcame the hated goddess of Olympus and captured the evil witch Corinthia. They smoked the hookah, ate the mangoes, bit into the apple, screamed and yelled and ballyhooed to their heart's content, as a painting upon the wall began to melt like a bizarro episode of Night Gallery. Worms came out of their mouths and nostrils as the smell of shit was penetrating, intoxicating, as I awoke from my nightmare, still sitting on the toilet. It's a political poem somewhere in there.
Somewhere in there. It's a life poem.
It's a romantic poem. It's to me is about a man coming back from war and how he's received, in this hallucinogenic, dream state that he's lying in his bed. His wife's waiting for him. She's all ready to, do the old in and out, because she's been lonely. Yeah. Anyways, but that's one of those off the wall pieces.
You've been listening to Gregorio Gomez. You're listening to Poetry Spoken Here, and now we're going to talk to Dan Wilcox of Albany, New York, about what he claims is the world's largest collection of photographs of unknown poets. No one has ever challenged that claim. I believe he's correct. Dan, how did you get into this unusual project?
Well, it sort of fell into it because I was going to poetry readings. This is when I was living in New York City, and this is in the mid 80s, I guess, or before that, early 80s. And I would go to poetry readings, and I found myself taking notes on what the poets looked like. So, particularly when I was living in New York in the late 70s, I'd be hanging out, and they'd be neighborhood poets. And if I'd see them on the street, then I wouldn't remember who their names were. But isn't that a poet I saw? So I was taking notes, and then I realized, idiot, you know how to use a camera? You can take pictures. So I started bringing my camera along, and I took pictures. I think one of my earliest pictures, was actually at an Eileen Miles poetry reading. And so I started taking photos when I would go to these readings. And then I moved up to Albany, And I thought I wouldn't be hearing any more poetry anymore and everything. But lo and behold, I ran into this character named Tom Nattell, who was starting poetry readings. He already had a 24-hour readings against the end of the world, which I went to a few times before I actually moved up. And I started taking pictures of these events with a Canon. I don't know what I had, a TX at the time, or eventually got a Canon A1. But back then, in the film days, for all the youngsters out there in the audience who might be listening, back there in the film days, most people didn't have cameras. And so often at a poetry reading, I was the only guy with a camera, including at such prestigious events as the Writers Institute up at the University at Albany. And I would show up with my camera and I'd take pictures. And then they asked me if they could get some prints of the photos. So, and every time I went to an open mic, I'd take a picture of the poet and write down their name and stuff like that. Before you know it, I had thousands of pictures. And then when the digital age came in, about 2009, I think, is when I got my digital camera. It makes it a lot easier. But also, now you show up at poetry readings and everyone's got their phones out and and their smartphones and everything, and they're all taking pictures and everything. And they show up on Facebook even before I can put them up on Facebook. Yeah. And because they go right from the phone, I got to go home and take my little memory card out, stick it in the computer, and do all that. And now everybody's doing it now. I don't think they have the collection I have. When I did a count at one time of my film, and this is before I switched to digital, and I had about 15,000 photos.
Whoa!
I'm guessing I'm up to around 20,000 photos in these archival photo boxes. They're all arranged alphabetically by the poet's name, so I can find them. And I have some that it might be venues or something like that in different divisions, and events. Sometimes if it's a big long event and I take lots of pictures, I'd separate them. But they're all in boxes. I'm sitting right next to me right now. Then when I switched over to the digital camera, I had to devise a new method of keeping track of these things. And for a while I did a spreadsheet, but a friend of mine pointed out, since I use a Mac, why don't you just use iPhoto and load them up on there? I thought it would take up too much space on my computer, but it doesn't matter anymore with these nice, big, huge computers. So I don't know how many I have. I have never counted that. So I'm guessing that I might be pushing close to 50,000 photos.
Oh,
Poets. I have some famous ones. If you Google Allen Ginsberg or Anne Waldman, and you get that Google Images kind of choice you have where you can look down the photos. If you go scroll down, you'll see some of my photos in that mess there.
if people want to see a chunk of your collection, how do they?
Well, they can see close to 3,000 photos on my Flickr site, which is www.flickr, that's FLICKR, no E, .com/photos/DWLCX. And I suppose if you get the Flickr and you forget that tag, you can probably put my name in there and it'll come up.
Yeah.
I've got over.
I Googled Dan Wilcox blog before we got on.
Yeah.
And it came right up. So without the address, somebody could just do that.
Yep.
And your blogs document in words a lot of open mic and also
and photos on them too. And actually, if you go to my blog and you scroll down at the bottom, there's a whole list of links. And one of the links says something like my photos or something, and you can go to it from there. But I can't remember when I went on Flickr, and it may have been close to 2009, but I have almost 400,000 hits on that over those years. And there'll be some days I'll get like 5 or 6 hits, and then sometimes, particularly if I put up new photos or for some unknown reasons in the universe of the internet, I'll have as much as 1,500 hits in a single day.
Wow.
It varies.
Have any particular shots you're like proud of or so happy that you got that picture?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of them like that. One is a picture I took when Anne Waldman was in Albany many years back. again with the film camera, reading at the QE2, and she did a performance, and her young nephew played saxophone, and I took a shot of them. And when Anne came out with a huge, big selected poems of hers, or collected poems, I guess it is, before she got into these longer poems, but the huge single volume. Each section was divided by a photo, and some of the photographers were Allen Ginsberg or Gerard Malanga and all those people. And she asked to include one of my photos. So one of my photos is in that book of hers. It's a photo of her nephew, who's now grown up and plays in a rock band or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's a good one. Another one was when Ginsberg was here in the early 90s. I took a lot of pictures of him performing also at the QE2, and we raffled prints off for the readings against the end of the world that Tom ran. That was a fundraiser for the Albany Peace and Energy Council. And I sent copies to Ginsberg, and he signed copies. He kept one for himself, and he signed 3 copies. We raffled 2, and I kept one for myself. So I have a photo, my own photo of Allen Ginsberg signed by Allen Ginsberg. So, I'm pretty proud. Cool. I'm pretty proud of that.
The whole project is just very cool.
Well, I just stumbled into it, like I think of, the Shaker hymn that says, it's a gift to be simple. It's a gift to be free. It's a gift to come down where you ought to be. And I think I've come down where I ought to be.
You've been listening to Poetry Spoken Here. I'm Charlie Rossiter, inviting you to join us again next time to let poetry speak to you. Music for today's program was written and performed by Jack Rossiter Monley. And remember, Poetry Spoken Here is more than a podcast. You can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/poetryspokenhere. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/poetryspokenhere. For more about today's show and other Poetry Spoken Here podcasts, as well as our blog, just visit our website, poetryspokenhere.com. If you'd like to submit suggestions of poets or topics for future podcasts, you can send to our email address, poetryspokenhere@gmail.com.